You didn't do anything to this, did you? The opening statement? Okay. The committee will come to order. Good morning. We appreciate everybody being here. Cybersecurity has been one of this committee's top priorities. We've held numerous hearings and worked on meaningful legislation to ensure small businesses have every possible resource to protect themselves against a cyber attack. Weeks ago, I, along with my friend from across the aisle, Representative Dwight Evans of Pennsylvania, introduced legislation to ensure that America's small business development centers have the best possible cybersecurity training so that they can better assist small businesses with their cyber strategies. Unfortunately, we have also heard too many firsthand accounts from small business owners who have been victims of cyber attacks. One case in particular that stands out is the story of a small business owner who testified before this committee last year. He owned an indoor go-karting facility in Maine and had a number of employees and families that depended on him. He told the committee that he was struck by a phishing scam. He logged on to his bank account, and to his utter disbelief, his balance was zero. And that happened on a payday, no less. So all his employees were at risk of not being paid that day. So he was really panic-stricken. Fortunately, he caught it just in the nick of time and was able to stop the funds from being transferred, but that's usually, unfortunately, not the case. Cybersecurity experts have told this committee about the growing number of cyber threats facing America's 28 million small businesses. In 2016 alone, the Justice Department recorded nearly 300,000 cybersecurity complaints. This number increases every year. 60% of small businesses that fall victim to a cyber attack close up shop within 6 months. And the estimated average cost of a cyber attack on a small business is over $30,000. And that may not be a huge amount to a large corporate entity in the United States, but to a mom and pop small business person, $30,000, that can mean why 60% of small businesses go out of business within 6 months of being hit by a cyber attack. In our committee's efforts to spotlight these serious and growing threats, it has become clear that we need to think outside the box as we work to thwart cyber attacks. Small businesses must also be diligent as they manage their IT systems and educate their staffs about the importance of cybersecurity. They should also be creative as they consider different ways to spread risk and manage their cyber strategies. One increasingly feasible solution is cybersecurity insurance. Many larger corporations are already exploring this approach to dealing with cyber attacks. It's likely that small businesses will follow. Of course, the widespread adoption of cybersecurity insurance policies is not without its challenges, both for small businesses and for the insurance providers. Small businesses must determine what policies and coverage options make sense for them and also implement basic cybersecurity best practices. Furthermore, the cybersecurity insurance marketplace is remarkably new, and many of the providers still lack the historical data to offer appropriate plans to consumers, which drives up the cost to policyholders. Yet, as they look to improve their models and cyber risk scenarios, cybersecurity insurance will become more viable and more accessible. Today, we will hear from a panel of witnesses that all have some level of experience with cybersecurity insurance and can offer in-depth perspectives on both the benefits of cybersecurity insurance and the challenges that still lie ahead. I look forward to hearing our witnesses' views on how small businesses can more effectively manage their cyber risk, and possibly with the help of cybersecurity insurance. And I would now like to yield to the ranking member, Ms. Velasquez, for her opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Internet has undoubtedly transformed the way small business operate. E-commerce empowers America's 28 million small businesses, a unique opportunity to sell their products not only across the country but around the world. Unfortunately for small business owners, when it comes to the health of their businesses, cyber hygiene often falls to the back burner. The lack of preventive measures can result in hacks and other cyber incidents that have major and costly implications for small business and their ability to operate. The topic of this hearing is particularly timely. If Russia was able to use cyber attacks to penetrate our democratic institutions, by comparison, a small business seems an easy target. The fact of the matter is there will continue to be cyber threats from those who will seek to damage our national security, our economic security, and our political systems. And there will continue to be criminals who seek to profit by stealing sensitive data held by the government or in the private sector. Cyber criminals have realized small entities are more exposed than larger businesses that have dedicated in-house IT personnel overseeing their systems and networks. In 2016 alone, more than 1.1 billion identities were stolen. This is worrisome, perhaps lethal, for companies that have a reputation of safeguarding their customers' information and need to maintain their credibility. Small businesses that lose customer information when their security is breached suffer significant costs, financially and in the loss of customer trust. And once businesses get compromised, fully recovering from a cyber attack is extremely difficult, if it is noticed at all. On average, small businesses that get hacked made the discovery more than 200 days after the attack has occurred. For the federal government, cybersecurity should be a priority. But the private sector must also stand up to the challenge and complement the existing federal resources. Given the financial consequences that a cyber attack may have on small businesses, there is a new industry of insurance providers focused on providing policies to protect them. Yet, there are a number of factors making this an expensive undertaking. A lack of adequate data underscores the complex nature of creating cyber liability policies for small firms. Also, the type of business, the risk management procedures, and the continually evolving threats make it difficult for the insurers and the small business. Today's hearing will help us look at this novel idea and learn what role Congress plays in streamlining such an important insurance product. I look forward to hearing the challenges small businesses face in selecting a cybersecurity insurance policy and the hurdles insurers must overcome to offer viable and comprehensive cybersecurity insurance solutions. It is clear from recent events that these issues are not diminishing. If anything, they're growing more important. Cybersecurity concerns, from Russia's attack on our political institutions to criminal enterprises preying on small businesses, merit our attention more than ever before. I would like to thank you all for being here this morning, and I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Gentlelady yields back, and if committee members have opening statements, I'd ask that they be submitted for the record. And I'd now like to explain our timing rules and lights here. It's pretty simple. We operate under the 5-minute rule. There's a lighting system to assist you there. The green light will be on for 4 minutes. The yellow light will come on, let you know you got a minute to wrap up, and then the red light will come on and you're supposed to stop. Most people do. But we'll give you a little leeway, but if you could stay within those parameters, we'd appreciate it very much. And I'd now like to introduce our distinguished panel. Our first witness is Robert Luft, the owner and president of Surefire Innovations, a service-disabled, veteran-owned small business and minority business enterprise located in my home district of Cincinnati, Ohio. And Mr. Luft and I actually talked about this a long time ago, and he brought this to my attention, and I think that actually was how this hearing came into being here. So don't screw it up, because you're the one that did it. So Surefire Innovations specializes in providing network infrastructure services to companies all across the country. Prior to starting his company, Mr. Luft served our country for 16 years in the Army as a combat engineer. He's testifying on behalf of the National Small Business Association. We thank him for his service to our country, and we also welcome him here today. I'd now like to yield to the ranking member to introduce our next witness, who I believe is a constituent, and whose first name is Erica, which happens to be our daughter's name. You even spelled it the same way. So now yield.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It is my pleasure to introduce Ms. Erica Davis, Senior Vice President and Head of Specialty Products, Errors, and Omissions at Zurich. She is also a constituent from my district in Brooklyn, so I'm very proud and welcome. Prior to joining Zurich in 2009, she was a senior underwriting officer for the technology insurance specialty at the Chubb Group of Insurance Companies. Ms. Davis holds a Bachelor's of Arts degree from the University of Arizona. Welcome.
Thank you. And our third witness will be Mr. Eric Cernak, Vice President and Cyber Risk Practice Leader at Munich Re in Hartford, Connecticut. In his role, Mr. Cernak provides leadership in all cyber efforts, oversees Munich Re's property and casualty operations, and develops strategies to help the company compete in the cyber marketplace. He's testifying today on behalf of the Reinsurance Association of America, RAA, and the Property Casualty Insurers Association of America, PCI. We thank you for testifying here this morning. I now like to once again yield to the ranking member for introduction of our fourth witness.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It is my pleasure to introduce Mr. Damon Gifford, National Leader and Principal of Security and Privacy Consulting at Risk Advisory Services. He has over 20 years of experience in a wide array of positions, including time in the U.S. Air Force. Mr. Gifford has served as the manager and lead technician for security assessments performed on some of the largest corporations and government entities in the world. He holds a bachelor's degree from the United States Air Force Academy and a master's degree in computer science from the University of Michigan. Welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. And we also thank you for your service, Mr. Gifford. And Mr. Luff, you're welcome here and recognized for 5 minutes. And you need to turn the mic on there. Yeah, you got to turn it on.
Good morning. Thank you, Chairman Chabot, Ranking Member Velasquez, and members of the House Small Business Committee for inviting me to testify today on the current state of cybersecurity for small companies and how cyber insurance can help small business transfer risk. My name is Robert Luff, and I'm the owner of Surefire Innovations located in Cincinnati, Ohio. I am pleased to be here representing the National Small Business Association, where I currently serve on the Leadership Council and the Technology Council. Surefire Innovations is a certified service-disabled, veteran-owned small business and minority business enterprise, specializing in network infrastructure, design and installation of hardwired, wireless, security, and smart city networks. After my military service in the Army, where I had the honor to serve on multiple combat deployments to Iraq during my 16-year career, I decided that entrepreneurship was my path, and hence the founding of Surefire Innovation. Cybercrime is growing rapidly, with annual costs to the global economy estimated to reach over $2 trillion by 2019. Organizations of all sizes are at risk for cyber attacks. Small business represents more than 97% of business in the U.S. Alarmingly, in 2015, 43% of all attacks were directed at small business. Despite the growing awareness of cyber-related crimes, 77% of small business owners believe their company is not at risk for cyber attacks. The risk of being a target for cybercrime is high. 42% of small business surveyed by the National Small Business Association reported being a victim of a cyber attack, with the average cost being $32,000 when business banking accounts were hacked and $7,000 on average for small business overall. So, what can we do as small business to address this issue? We can start with what I learned in the Army. Keep it simple. By utilizing the SBA's top 10 cybersecurity tips, this will provide a framework for all small business, even those who are not technologically savvy and currently have zero protections in place. Simple measures like installing antivirus software, the use of complex passwords, and backing up information. Since total elimination of threats is impossible, protecting against them should be a top management priority. Unfortunately, many small businesses do not place cyber threat as a top priority. This is evident by the fact that 60% of small companies go out of business within 6 months after a cyber attack. Small business need not only think of ways to mitigate cyber attacks, but also how to transfer that risk away from their company. This can be accomplished with the cyber liability insurance policy, which provides coverage in the event of a cyber attack. A typical cyber liability policy will include the following coverages: theft and fraud, forensic investigation, network business interruption, extortion, and data loss. What led to my purchase of a cyber liability policy is a subcontractor was performing services on one of my projects, suffered a bank account breach that resulted in the loss of $15,000. This was a catastrophic event. Those funds were required for payroll and put enormous strain on its employees. This event made me realize that our company was just as vulnerable, and despite having a cybersecurity plan, we did not have a cyber liability insurance policy. So in the event we were breached, we would not have any financial protections available. Unfortunately, we were not the exception, as 75% of small business do not have cyber liability coverage in place. Most small businesses do not have the appetite to purchase another insurance policy. My annual premium is $3,200. The level of security this provides my company does not completely remove all of my concerns, but it affords me the knowledge that if we were hacked, protective steps have been taken to address any potential damages to the company and my employees. There are enormous amounts of resources available to help educate small business on cybersecurity and the potential ramifications of not having the appropriate plan and policies in place. The issue is awareness. The more we can help inform small business on how to mitigate and transfer these risks, the greater the positive impact small business will have on our economy. Thank you for the opportunity to address this very pressing issue.
Thank you very much. Ms. Davis, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Velasquez, and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today about the private sector's role in providing risk management solutions to protect businesses from cyber risk. I am Erica Davis, and I lead a team of market-facing underwriters at Zurich North America, one of the 5 providers currently leading the North American cybersecurity insurance marketplace. Zurich is invested in identifying risks and delivering solutions for our customers. Zurich is a member of the American Insurance Association, the leading property casualty insurance trade organization, representing approximately 325 major insurers. I appreciate AIA's focus on cybersecurity. The cyber landscape continues to evolve, making companies increasingly vulnerable to the potential harm of a security or privacy event. While awareness of the threats is growing across all sizes of organizations, businesses are still struggling how to understand cyber risk, that is, the full scope of their exposures and how best to protect themselves. They must determine whether they should retain the residual risk or transfer it through the purchase of a cyber insurance product. Our approach to cybersecurity includes understanding attitudes to cyber risk, providing tailored coverage to meet our customers' needs, and working with businesses to adopt a mindset of resilience rather than just protection. Last fall, Zurich and Advisen released a survey of risk managers and other risk professionals. It found that 87% of respondents believe a technology interruption would have a moderate to significant threat to their organization. As with any line of insurance, risk culture is critical to underwriting cyber insurance. Businesses must build a culture of resilience and operational awareness at all levels, rather than simply viewing cyber risk as a technology issue. Insurance is just one piece of the cyber risk management puzzle, but the role of insurance is increasing as customers seek risk insights and feedback from their insurance advisors. It's really become more of a partnership, with businesses now focusing on not just what happens post-event and if a loss is paid. They value having qualified, vetted resources available to them, especially at their moment of crisis. And they're focusing more on risk mitigation tools their insurance providers can provide to them. The business community's interconnectivity and reliance on technology has increased, and that creates additional points of entry and new threat vectors. And the cyber insurance and exposure is brought in to include potential property damage for something like critical infrastructure, supply chain ripple effects, bodily injury from autonomous vehicles, or cyber espionage. And the issue is only becoming more complicated. In an effort to continuously help customers and protect themselves from risk, Zurich began participating as a key industry consultant in a public-private partnership by the University of Maryland and the National Institute of Standards and Technology. We are proud to be part of this initiative. Zurich is also collaborating with Deloitte to help improve a business's cyber resilience. Policyholders can complement Zurich's cyber insurance solution with risk management services through Deloitte to understand their level of cyber exposure and resilience. Underwriting of the cyber product is evolving, as are the risks. The insurance community is continuously working to understand the full scope of the exposures and what the controls may need to be. Each business needs to be underwritten differently. And as insurers, we must continue to refine our own understanding of those exposures. Finding solutions to the most complicated of cyber risks will require collaboration between the insurance industry, governments, academia, and other think tanks to establish standards, encourage information sharing, build resilience, and create adequate global governance. As the market evolves, Zurich is committed to staying at the forefront of the cybersecurity issue, and we will continue to develop additional insurance solutions going forward. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you very much. Mr. Cernak, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Good morning. I'm Eric Cernak, Vice President, U.S. Cyber and Privacy Risk Practice Leader at Munich Re U.S., testifying on behalf of the Reinsurance Association of America and the Property Casualty Insurance Association of America. Munich Re and HSB provide cyber and privacy-related insurance and reinsurance protection for small and large businesses in the United States and throughout the world. HSB Group has an A++ AM Best financial strength rating. We were one of the first companies to provide reinsurance for cyber risks to small businesses. In addition to reinsurance, we underwrite cyber risk, develop products, and work with small businesses to help mitigate cyber-related exposures. Today's hearing is an important discussion to highlight the success of the private sector in developing cyber insurance. It will help raise awareness among the small business community about the importance of purchasing cyber insurance as a preventative risk management tool and critical safety net should a cyber event occur. A 2017 Risk Management Solutions report concluded that the number of large magnitude data exfiltration events has grown substantially, and companies are increasingly investing in their own cybersecurity systems. However, a June report by broker Aon estimated that only 19% of small businesses in the United States had purchased cyber insurance compared to around 75% of certain large companies globally. More insurers have offered cyber insurance over time, from less than a dozen in the early 2000s to more than 70 in 2016. As we see more high-profile cyber events, small businesses are increasingly aware of their exposure. This has prompted the insurance industry to add cyber endorsements to existing small business insurance policies. A significant part of the value proposition of these cyber insurance policies is loss prevention services. Participants in a 2016 Hartford Steam Boiler survey listed vulnerability assessments, next-generation firewalls, IT security audits, and intrusion detection as the most helpful loss prevention services. Participants also listed reasons that they didn't purchase cyber insurance. They didn't need it, cost of coverage, and an application process that is too complicated and confusing. These results suggest that education is key to increasing the take-up rate of cyber insurance by small companies. The public and private sectors have a role to play in increasing the cyber insurance take-up rate, helping businesses overcome the "it won't happen to me" mentality, constructively addressing cyber vulnerabilities, and preparing for the aftermath of a cyber event. Cyber attacks may not be a matter of if, but when. It is essential for businesses, which are increasingly interconnected, to be prepared, protected, and resilient. Insurance can help with all three. The insurance marketplace needs to continue to refine the process and coverage to reduce complexity associated with the purchasing of cyber insurance. For example, common coverage form terminology could help applicants better understand what different policies cover. Insurers are also grappling with 4 factors in offering cyber insurance. As both the chairman and ranking member have stated, there is no significant historical loss data. Second, the cause of loss is generated by an active adversary that changes with new technology. Third, insurers are grappling with the evolving patchwork of state, federal, international, cyber-related requirements. And fourth, cyber is not bound by geography and poses potential aggregation risk for insurers. As these factors evolve, Munich Re and HSB are continually talking to our small business customers to better understand their needs. We are also monitoring the technological, regulatory, and societal trends that could pose cyber risks. So what can Congress do to improve cyber protections for small businesses? We specifically encourage Congress and the administration to coordinate cybersecurity policy among federal agencies and designate lead agencies to coordinate discussions where appropriate. It is critical that this coordination includes state insurance regulators and that we all work together to avoid a conflicting patchwork of state, federal, and international standards. Munich Re and HSB Group stand ready to work with you to protect small businesses from cybersecurity threats. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Gephardt, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Chairman Shabbat, Ranking Member Velasquez, and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to discuss the cybersecurity challenges that have become a constant material threat within the small business community. My name is Damian Gephardt, and during my career, I've performed hundreds of security assessments and cyber breach intrusion investigations within small businesses. I was asked to speak today regarding how legislation such as H.R. 3170 and private sector solutions such as cyber insurance products can help organizations manage their cyber risk. In a study performed last year, RSM performed extensive data mining within a set of cyber insurance claims and found that 50% of the reported attacks were against organizations with $50 million in revenue or less. Attacks against small businesses are not an anomaly. They are the norm. This is the key demographic that is being targeted by hackers. What is needed is a venue through which small businesses can find simple, direct guidance on how to protect their environments and mitigate risk, and that also provides access to resources with the necessary expertise to chaperone them through the implementation of that guidance. The current legislation addresses part of this requirement by essentially creating cyber mentors within the small business development centers. These personnel could quickly become the frontline advisors that are so desperately needed to guide small businesses through the deployment of technical security solutions and administrative risk management techniques such as acquiring cyber insurance. While this is a critical first step, the SBDCs hold the promise of a myriad of benefits that can be made available in the future. Again, to make material progress on this issue, we need to move to clear, concise, pragmatic solutions. While it might seem like an abnormal suggestion, what is needed is to emulate our peers within the hacking community. The underground markets excel and become exceedingly efficient at turning large masses of unskilled, technically challenged individuals into groups of, while not elite, at least effective cyber attackers. We lack that equivalent process on the defensive side in which we can rapidly take a large number of small businesses and have them become at least efficient and effective at basic cybersecurity. While it sounds relatively simple, reference environments, as they are known, are not common in the small business community, which often leads to organizations cobbling together their security architecture and governance based on their individual interpretations of best practice. Similar to the methods of our adversaries, small and middle markets need a dedicated hub where they can find simple, realistic guidance on how to deploy security solutions that are complete and effective at a basic level. This would then need to be paired with programs dedicated to delivering to security training directly to the IT and management members of those small businesses, as most of these organizations simply cannot acquire the necessary security talent on the open market. The SBDCs could play a critical role in the process of working with government entities, private sector consultants, and vendors to create standardized models and security training. It should be mentioned that an additional benefit of deploying such common models is that it would then allow the SBDCs to address the need for actionable cyber threat intelligence that could be easily consumed and put to use by small businesses. If common reference environments are made available to small businesses, many of these entities would be highly interested in deploying these frameworks if they knew they can consume and utilize threat intelligence in a plug-and-play manner. It should be noted that this support was included in the prior H.R. 5064 legislation that passed this committee last year, but then later expired in the Senate. At this point, the foundations would be laid for a base-level accreditation program for small businesses in which they can demonstrate that they have achieved basic cyber controls and processes. The SBDCs would be a natural fit to oversee this program and could then coordinate between newly accredited small businesses and insurance carriers to facilitate the acquisition of cyber insurance. These suggestions create a process that naturally flows from a set of standardized security templates, through the training and the deployment of those templates, through the accreditation that the controls were deployed properly, through the coordination with the cyber insurance market to offset the residual risk. This process in its entirety represents the most requested types of support by small business executives encapsulated in a clear, concise, and pragmatic approach. It would materially improve the current security status of approximately 50% of the U.S. economy. The final point I would suggest would be to use the SBDCs as a coordination point between small businesses and a designated, responsive law enforcement entity. Currently, when a small business is compromised, they can contact their local police departments, which are often willing to help but technically unable to do so, or they can contact the FBI or Secret Service that are technically able to help, but typically do not have the bandwidth to do so. This situation has created a mindset within the small business community that when it comes to cyber matters, they have essentially been abandoned to the Wild West where the rule of law does not apply. Legislation that addresses the points I've described above would greatly improve the security and longevity of the U.S. small and middle market businesses. Mr. Chairman, this concludes my statement, and I look forward to further questions.
Thank you very much, and I'll yield myself 5 minutes. And Mr. Luft, I'll go to you first. Could you tell us what process that you went through in determining what cyber insurance coverage that you ultimately ended up with, and is there any recommendations that you would make to other small businesses who might be considering, first of all, whether or not they should get insurance coverage, and then secondly, you know, who they should get it from? I'm not saying what company, but just the kind of process.
Well, it was my first assumption that cyber insurance should just be as simple as any type of insurance. So I reached out to my existing insurance provider. What I quickly found out is that's not the case. He was not familiar with a lot of policies. So once I saw some hesitancy on his end, I sought some additional resources and found an agent that was exclusive to cyber insurance. That would be my first suggestion to any small business. And one of the first things that a company needs to look for when they're looking at that, there's some standard coverages in there, the extortion coverage, data losses. So the company could assume that those things are going to be included in the policy. But one thing that they need to ask for is retroactivity. When you first initially buy that policy, it's going to become effective that inception date. But anything that may have happened previously, it would behoove that small business to ask for maybe a year of retroactivity, just in case there is something lurking there in their network to ensure that they are safe.
Thank you very much. Ms. Davis, let me go to you next. You mentioned in your testimony that not all causes of loss are covered by a particular insurance policy. Could you provide the committee with an example of what would be uninsured loss and how small businesses can protect themselves from that type of liability?
Sure. So the exposures that arise from cyber threat continues to evolve, and there are certain elements of loss that at this point are not transferable to an insurance policy. There is work being done by the insurance community to try and develop insurance solutions for some of those losses. But my advice to small businesses really echoes some of the comments that we've heard already, and that's just providing additional education to those businesses. So things like this hearing today really bring awareness to the topic, but where assistance is needed is helping them connect the dots. I think small businesses today have an understanding of what the exposures are and what risks they may bring to the business, but they're struggling with the how. What sort of action items they can implement to make their operation more resilient and secure. So it really does come down to businesses understanding, the risk and protecting themselves from it, which is really done through risk mapping. Smaller businesses need to understand what downtime could mean to their organization. Also, the sensitive data that they're holding, what sort of costs they may incur if that data is compromised. And I think that qualitative aspect is an area and it's an opportunity where the insurance community can assist with some of that process. The other point that I'll mention is just in terms of connecting the dots and bringing action items to them, it's about understanding if employee training is only being offered by roughly 80% of organizations now, that doesn't translate to the fact that we've seen a growing number of threats really come out of exploitation of that human element, of that big vulnerability. And 50% of respondents to that Advise in Zurich survey noted that humans or their employees unintentionally infecting their network was a top concern. Okay. So just helping bring together those pieces.
Thank you. I've got less than a minute to go, and I've got two witnesses. I'm going to throw this question open. It's kind of maybe an impossible question, so either one of you want to handle this. If a business has X amount of insurance where they're covering fire and a whole range of things, and now they've got to consider cybersecurity insurance. And let's say they're going to go with the insurance company they have now. How much more typically could they expect to pay for this that they're not paying without it right now? Percentage-wise, are we talking an additional 10%, 25%? And I know that's a tough question. It would depend on how big the company is. What would your estimate be if you have one?
Yeah, so, and that's an excellent question. I think
I'm not sure if that mic's on or not.
Is it? It is.
It
Yep.
is, okay.
That's an excellent question, and as you point out, it is going to depend on the class of business that they're in, the amount of data that they have, what coverages they're actually looking for. There are two approaches to cyber insurance in the marketplace today. One is a standalone policy,
Right.
which is probably going to cost you thousands of dollars.
Yeah. I would guess that would be probably more. So if, let's say you went with the company that you have now and they did have the expertise, unlike what Mr. Left had said he experienced. I mean, ballpark, what range are we probably talking about? Not either one of you want to venture this.
Again, that's hard to formulate because every one of the organizations, when we work with them, and I'm not on the insurance side, I'm on the breach investigation side, but so I see the flip side of it. Every one of the organizations, the question is going to come down to, what does your network look like? How much data do you have? How does the data pass through? Have you passed your credit card payments to a third party? Depending on how they answer that, you can have two organizations that are the same size in the same industry that have put together their networks differently. They're going to pay vastly different amounts for insurance.
I told you it was an impossible question. Either one of the first two witnesses want to take a quick stab at it? Ballpark?
So there's a number of factors that contribute to that, so coverages, but also limits and retention. So it really depends on what an organization's risk tolerance is. Somebody may say to themselves, I feel as though I can retain this risk. I'm not at high risk of this sort of event occurring, and they may be purchasing a $1 million limit with a $250,000 retention purely to satisfy a contractual requirement. Somebody else may opt for hundreds of millions in coverage. So those are some of the influencers.
Mr. Luft, you're from Cincinnati. I expect you to give me an answer. What do you
So, Chairman, I could talk specific about what's happening with my company. And so for my liability policy covering our installation, for $1 million policy, that's about $4,000. When I bought that standalone cyber insurance policy, that was $3,200, so roughly about 80%.
Good. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. My time has expired. I apologize for going a little bit over. Ranking members recognized.
Thank you. Mr. Cernak, we need, and I believe that you stated that is not if the small businesses are at risk. The question is when it's going to happen. So we need to operate under the assumption that aggressors are already inside our networks. With that said, what alternatives do small businesses have once they become aware an aggressor already has access to their information and technology?
Sure. Yeah. Once you've identified that someone may be within your four walls, I think it's incumbent and imperative, that you get somebody like my colleague here to the right that could come in and identify exactly what is wrong and not to stop at the first answer. We've seen instances where ransomware is extremely popular now. A lot of businesses are being impacted by ransomware. And it's a very visible attack. But what the criminals are doing on the other side of that is they're loading additional software in the back end so that once you rectify the very visible issue and you may think your problem is solved and go back to managing your business, there's this other software that's going to start exfiltrating data down the road. So you really need to get a professional in to do a thorough analysis, and your insurance company can help you identify those people.
Mr. Gifford.
The part I'm going to hit is this actually delineates quite a difference between the small business market and even the mid-market, in that both of those groups are going to struggle preventing the breach. It's very difficult in today's day and age with the types of exploits and malware to keep them out. The more complex the organization, quite often they will notice that they're breached earlier. And even if the attacker did get in, quite often they've stood up security monitoring and other tools that can let us retrace the steps of the attacker so we can reconstruct what did the attacker do in the environment, how long were they there, what did they take, what did they touch. In the small markets, quite often they're not even that mature. The attackers can get in, By the time the organization finds out that an attacker's in, when we show up, there is no evidence, or the small business has already destroyed the evidence in their initial response, they've overwritten it. And so when we're talking about the damages for small businesses, a big part of their problem is they always have to assume the worst case scenario because they either didn't have the evidence or they destroyed it. We have to assume the attacker essentially reached everything, and legal precedent says they have to do mass notification. Where in the larger environments, it might be the same attacker who did the same thing. We can constrain, we can put bounds around what the breach actually was so that it inordinately impacts the smaller environments simply because they are less able to reconstruct what the issue was, even if they couldn't stop the attack.
Thank you. Ms. Davis, cyber insurance is in its infancy as an insurance product. How has it evolved since its inception to meet the demands of small firms and the needs of neutralizing relentless cyber attackers?
So the roots of the product were really in the technology E&O, and as some of the first-party costs to an organization, the immediate costs after a breach began to evolve with notification standards and credit monitoring, et cetera, the policy was built out to include those first-party coverages. And what we're finding now is that financial institutions, healthcare organizations, those early adopters in heavily regulated segments are really more driven towards that personal information and healthcare information. That next wave was the retail organizations. And what we're finding now is that the coverages have evolved to really address the interdependencies that we're seeing across supply chain. And so business interruption, loss of income, extra expense that an organization would have to pay in the event of downtime is becoming a key driver in the coverage discussion.
And can you explain how the process to create policies is complicated by various states and federal laws, and its disjointed federal cybersecurity effort?
Sure. So we talked about some of the first steps when an organization realizes that they've been compromised, and certainly forensics is a big piece of that to understand what went wrong and why and how many, the extent of the information that was compromised. I would argue that, very early on in that process, there also needs to be legal representation, attorney breach coaches who are helping to prioritize those notification and needs to individuals who were impacted. And the challenges that creates is really, each and every state at this point, and attorney general is handling those topics differently. What's considered legal compliance and what time frame individuals need to be notified, how they need to be notified. Does it have to be through USPS? Is email sufficient? And so the legal costs for small businesses really add up in that process. And so standardization of those requirements would help bring down the costs associated with it.
Thank you.
Thank you. The gentlelady's
You're
time's
fine.
expired. Thank you. The gentleman from Missouri, Mr. Lukemeyer, who's the vice chairman of this committee, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And this is a subject that we're talking about today that 10 years ago it wouldn't even be on our radar, and yet today here we are. And so it's kind of scary from the standpoint of what are we going to be talking about 10 years from now that is not on our radar today. And so that's how fast our society and evolution of all these things is happening. So, but that's just an aside. Mr. Cernak, you represented a reinsurance company. And we're talking about cyber today, and your company provides cyber insurance. Why are you a reinsurance company that reinsures insurance companies here today talking about cyber?
Thank you for the question. And it is a great question. I think the role that reinsurers play in this realm is to help bring more coverage make more coverage available to the end consumers, the small businesses, by enabling other property and casualty insurance companies to put products out in the marketplace and not only provide those carriers with the capacity, but with also the technical knowledge to provide a sustainable product that they can feel comfortable bringing to their insured customers. And so, beyond the dollars that a reinsurer can provide to these P&C carriers, it's also the claims expertise, the service provider networks, the forms development, and the rate development. You need all of those things to create a compelling product. And by doing that, we help other carriers introduce products in the marketplace, thus helping the end insureds.
Very good. the evaluating the risk here is really difficult. And I know Mr. Leff made a comment in his opening statement that 43% of the attacks are in small businesses. My staff's got a number here, 300, a company, businesses under $300 million in value, 50% of cyber attacks are on those businesses. This tells me we've got a very vulnerable group of folks here that probably don't have the expertise to deal with it, and so how do we protect them? So that's where insurance comes in. So, you know, I guess my concern is not necessarily, I know we've talked a little bit about the business interruption, basically coverages that you guys are involved in, but to me, the biggest risk for a small business is the liability exposure. And liability exposure is such that if I am in the lending business and I'm lending to a small business, and I see that they're very highly leveraged, and I see that they deal with lots of personal information, to me there's an exposure there that could really harm that credit. Therefore, that whole line of credit is endangered. Therefore, it's going to hurt me as a financial institution. And I can see that at some point the regulators are going to get involved in this and start asking and requiring for cyber insurance for certain lines of business that have more, that deal in more information. So, you know, if Mr. Cernak or Ms. Davis would like to take this, it looks to me like small businesses are the low-hanging fruit for the bad guys to go after. And I think in some cases, I was talking to some folks a while ago, that they can even be the back door to business, bigger business, which means you have an even bigger liability risk. So would you like to talk about that just for a second? How you want to approach that particular part of the coverage?
Sure, and I think you're right on with that assessment that we are starting to see small businesses be that backdoor into the larger businesses, and we're starting to see the larger businesses require contractually that these smaller business carry some level of cyber insurance. The struggle there is oftentimes they may or may not have an arbitrary dollar amount in terms of the limit they want carried, and they also do a fairly poor job of identifying the exact coverages they want those folks to carry. Your comment relative to the lending industry in particular, I think I have not seen that as of yet, but I think it is a valid concern.
Also, go ahead, Ms. Davis, you'd like to comment?
I totally agree, and thank you for the question. Absolutely, we're seeing that back channeling take place where it does feel as though the larger organizations are locked and loaded when it comes to their information security measures. But that supply chain that we reference has become a huge vulnerability, especially in the manufacturing space and when we think through items like corporate confidential information.
I think Mr. Leff made a comment a while ago with regards to a question I think one of our other folks made, and the comment was made with regards to things, covering things that may have happened in prior to the coverage being effective. And so my question is, does your policies, or are there policies out there that will take care of things that you put in place that weren't accurate or that exposed you not only before, but what happens if you put something in place, you let the policy drop or go to a different carrier? Does you have tail coverage or something out as well with this? Can you kind of explain the before and after coverages here, if there is such thing?
Yeah, so it's an important development in the cyber insurance space, the idea of prior acts. And the reason why it came about is because of the statistic that Congresswoman Velasquez noted of, 200 days potentially where, a perpetrator has been in the network. And we found the nature of those threats has changed as attackers used to enter a network, grab as much information as they can, and then get out. And now they tend to lurk and try and stay under the radar, grabbing small bits of information at the time. So that coverage is available in the marketplace, and typically we do find that affordable coverage to that effect is available as customers change carriers as needed.
The gentleman's time has expired. The gentlelady from New York, Ms. Clark, is recognized for 5 minutes.
I thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thank our ranking member. I want to also thank our witnesses for your expert testimony today. This is very important information. I think the average small business is really at a disadvantage in this day and age, not really conscious of the intrusion of those who would want to either extort them or use them as a tool for penetrating even larger enterprises. So I want to thank you once again for your insights. Ms. Davis, I did want to find out from you, how does your company tailor insurance policies for, is it for each client? Is there a one-size-fits-all package? Could you give us some insights into that?
Sure. So it's helpful to understand the underwriting process when answering this question. So let me start with that. Organizations would typically complete 1 to 2 underwriting applications, and those are submitted to various carriers by an insurance broker. It was noted earlier to really partner with a broker who has expertise in this space, since it is such an evolving area. And those applications have questions on them. Some are reflective or inclusive of controls kind of noted through the NIST framework. Others are outside of that. So there would be various, applications and levels of information that are provided at the time of the application process. But what the customers request, what an insured requests, is really driven, again, by more of their risk tolerance, why they're purchasing the policy. Are they looking at it as more of a contractual requirement, or are they looking for a more robust, cutting-edge solution? And a lot of that will influence the price as well.
So it is more of a tailored process based on the questionnaires that the individuals fill out.
That's correct.
And how widespread would you say this sort of practice within insurance, how widespread has that become, to your knowledge?
The tailoring of solutions?
No, I'm sorry. This sort of insurance practice for small business getting cybersecurity insurance.
So just so I understand, you're asking how widespread is it that the small businesses
within the
seeking?
Industry of insurance? Your company is one that has been identified. Have other insurers begun moving into this space?
Yes, absolutely. There's a growing recognition that small businesses are looking and actively seeking to raise their risk awareness. And, insurance is one piece of that puzzle. It shouldn't be the entire solution, but we are seeing increases in small to medium-sized organizations actively seeking out insurance policies for cyber.
Yeah, because sort of most brick and mortar type of businesses have insurance, right? So if there's theft insurance, what have you, but not many of those types of mom and pop establishments, which are very prevalent in Brooklyn, New York, where we're from, would be looking to essentially look at their sort of connectivity and determining how they would add that to a current policy.
And I think that's a great point, and it really gets at the way that the product has evolved from just a couple years ago, where it was really focused on more privacy-exposed organizations, and now we're at that new cusp of buyers and coverages that are more driven towards that business interruption, that network interruption, and the downtime and financial impact that it could mean to those mom-and-pop organizations.
Wonderful, thank you. Mr. Lufton, your testimony, you point out that small businesses often don't perceive themselves as being targets for cyber attacks. What can we do to educate the general public on the risks of not being protected, and what can we do to ensure that they have a place to go after a cyber attack takes place? As it stands now, where do they go?
Well, I would say the first step is the small business needs to understand that there is extreme risk out there, and they need to look no further than the television. There's plenty of reports about what's happening to major corporations, to small business on a daily basis. So my first suggestion, small business needs to take that initiative. From an education standpoint from this body, I do know from the federal resources, from the SBA being, especially within Cincinnati, they do a tremendous job of having events informing small business about cybersecurity and actions they need to take place. So I would think more what needs to happen is the initiative from the small business to take action.
And probably partnering with some chambers of commerce.
Absolutely,
and things
yes.
of that nature. Thank you very much again for your testimony here today, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you very much. Gentlelady's time has expired, and the gentlelady from American Samoa, Ms. Radawagan, who's the chairman of Subcommittee on Health and Technology, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Talofa, good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member, for holding this critical hearing. Thank you all for appearing today. Ms. Davis, my first question is for you. You mentioned that businesses with personal health and personal financial information consider data security as more of an issue. Are there any industries that you believe are prone to cyber attacks but currently do not see cybersecurity as a pressing issue?
I would say the one class of business where we're definitely seeing an increase in awareness is in the manufacturing space. And again, that gets back to more of the corporate confidential information, the supply chain, and what network interruption could mean to those organizations. Manufacturers historically had felt like the product didn't necessarily speak to their coverage needs, to their exposures, and we're definitely seeing that that maturity start to change in their thought process.
Thank you. My second question is actually for all of you. What do you think are the biggest risks for cybersecurity insurance providers that do not exist in other insurance markets? Mr. Luft?
Your question was specific to the cyber insurance companies?
Insurance providers, yes.
In speaking about the small business, the reason why they need to think about that, as the statistic has been mentioned several times today, that after a cyber attack, 60% of small business is out of business within 6 months. I think that's the greatest call for action from a small business perspective.
Ms. Davis?
I think one of the biggest challenges to insurers right now is really not having a solid sense of what their aggregation concerns may be. When we think through property as an example, you're able to model, right, what your windstorm exposed areas are. When it comes to cyber, there's all of these hidden or sort of silent interdependencies that you may not be able to track or to model in the underwriting process. So that's definitely a concern for us. I would also say the intersection of the various lines of business is unique to the cyberspace. We're talking today about, kind of those standalone cyber policies, but what we're finding is that as the threats evolve, some of these coverages are creeping into different policy lines, and so making sure that we have a way of identifying those gaps and redundancies to make sure we're providing good, holistic, meaningful solutions to our customers. And lastly, I would just say that, this is a product still in its infancy, and so we're learning together, across the industry to make sure that we provide more consistent underwriting processes, more consistency in our application process, and in the language and vernacular that's being used. And I think all those things are hurdles for us at this time.
Mr. Cernak?
Thank you for the question. I see two major challenges right now, in addition to the ones that Ms. Davis pointed out. First is the patchwork of regulations that we're faced with in terms of trying to address and create products. We have to not only worry about the state, but the federal and now international regulations and security standards. So that's one item. The other, as Congressman Lukemeyer mentioned in his remarks, is the smartphone is turning 10 years old this year, right? This exposure, never have we tried to ensure an exposure that is evolving this quickly. It's moving with the speed of technology, and that in and of itself poses challenges.
Thank you. Mr. Gopfert?
I'll speak as the neutral third party in the room quite often when things go bad. What we see working as responders with the insurers and the small businesses, it's more of a syntax issue. There's no common language to talk about security and risk within these organizations. So what we see is the insurance companies reaching out to the small businesses, trying to put together their policies and packages and understand the risk of the organization they're going to insure. And the small business, not being malicious, they simply don't understand security. When they're filling out the packages and trying to communicate how much data they have, how do they control it, their business partners, their systems, they don't know how to fill out the packages and applications in the right way. So quite often, the insurance companies will pick up that policy and not really understand what's underneath the hood until there's a breach, until we come in on the technical side and start touching the environment. Quite often, the insurance companies really don't understand how bad can get. And so until we can get to the point where there's sort of a standardized language where the insurance companies know how to rate the risk of a small organization and the small organization knows how to rate themselves, there's simply just going to be missed expectations on both sides.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very
Yield
much.
back.
Thank you very much. Ladies' time has expired. The gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Evans, who's ranking member of Subcommittee on Economic Growth, Tax, and Capital Access, is recognized, and I would like to thank him for his leadership on this issue and introducing legislation to ensure that the SBDCs accredit the people that will help to train small business folks to better protect themselves against cyber attacks. So we appreciate his leadership on this, and he's recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate you and the ranking member's leadership collectively on the fact that this is really a bipartisan approach, and we all got to work together. So what I want to piggyback a little bit and expand a little deeper on what Ms. Davis said in the term that she used, risk mapping. And use that term and kind of, if you have a crystal ball, if you say risk mapping, what particular industries are much more subject to the risk aspect in terms of where we are today? You said risk mapping, and give me a sense on categories of small businesses.
So when I speak through risk mapping, I'm thinking through it varies by industry, but it's also about identifying what's at risk from a pure data and network security view, but also the broader implications that may have on your organization. So the lost revenue or the downtime, it could mean the reputational risk. It could mean bodily injury or property damage, and bringing together a multi-stakeholder approach when evaluating cyber risk so that you're thinking of it as an organization, as an enterprise level. And in terms of, the cyber or the IT risk mapping component of that, it could mean from a retail organization, how many records you're holding, how long are you retaining them, for what reason are you retaining them, so that you're always keeping a proper calibration between your data risk and your data value.
And who would, okay, I'm starting my business, I mean, where would you go to kind of get that little sense of the mapping and understanding? To your knowledge, does anybody keep a track of what takes place in terms of the community? Because listening, you just said the smartphone is 10 years old. Is there any way you can go get a little sense of that?
So there are, businesses that you can turn to help you do that. But I would say the very first step is doing it internally, and again, engaging your stakeholders within an organization to make sure that you've got either a risk manager or somebody who's acting in a risk manager role, talking with HR, or if you have somebody handling the IT business in-house, but really just beginning to have that dialogue internally so that you can start to gain and act on the information that you learn through something like an incident response plan to help you, engage and limit your damages if and when an event does occur.
Mm-hmm. To the rest of the panel, hearing what Ms. Davis says, we just had this discussion about risk mapping, and as you look at it, what would you say in your particular case to your clients, understanding the aspect of risk mapping?
The first point I'm going to make is this is, again, dealing with small businesses.
Right.
If you tried to explain this concept to them, to your point, they don't know where to start.
Right.
This would be a perfect role for the small business development centers.
Right.
Because they touch so many different entities, in a lot of cases, they become the de facto knowledge sharing centers. In a lot of cases, they would be able to start you on that process and lay that out. The other point that I want to make out, when we deal with risk mapping, in a lot of cases that operates off the mindset that, like what you see in the news, of that there's hacking crews that are out targeting your specific organization and going after you. A lot of small businesses, when they're trying to consider their risk, they don't feel that they're at risk because we're too small, we're too new, no one's shooting at us. It misses the point that the vast majority of breaches are not targeted, and you can't plan for that risk. If you're plugged into the internet There's sort of the background radiation of the internet that's constantly grinding through looking for anybody that happens to be vulnerable, and it might happen to be you. And so a lot of organizations, when we first sit down to do risk mapping with them, they're shocked with that realization that they're not targeted. They simply were a target of opportunity on the network. And so I think the small business development centers would be great at communicating that message of, in your specific industry, this is what a risk map would look like. But don't forget there is a permanent residual risk that you simply can't excuse yourself from because you're too small or you're not in that industry.
I think there's also an opportunity for insurance agents and brokers to begin that process as well, because as they're sitting down discussing with their clients what their exposures are, they can start to ask the leading questions, if you will, as to what data do they have, where is it stored, and how do you use it, a lot of the points that Ms. Davis suggested. So I think insurance agents and brokers need to raise their level of education to help the clients.
I yield back the balance of my time. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you.
Chairman.
Gentleman's time's expired. The gentleman from Iowa, Mr. Blum, who's the chairman of the Subcommittee on Agriculture, Energy, and Trade, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the panelists for being here today to talk about a very important issue to small businesses. I am and was a small business person, and a few years back, my high-tech company was compromised via a cyber attack. I was absolutely shocked at how untrained law enforcement was on how to handle this situation, because we lost value. We lost value. Two questions concerning that for the entire panel. A, has that changed? Is law enforcement in general across the country better trained now to handle the theft of a company's information via cyber attack? And B, what can Congress do, or what can government do, assuming we're not where law enforcement needs to be? What can we do to, any ideas or suggestions on how we can change that?
To your first question, I hope. And the second question, as far as what Congress can do, whatever can be done to help inform small business about the number of threats that are there and helping small business understand what steps they can do to protect themselves is the greatest thing that can be done right now.
Again, I think the patchwork of regulations also can hinder a little bit of that, because there's this attitude of, well, who's ultimately responsible for that portion of the law enforcement if you've got different regulatory bodies that are involved in cyber events. So I think, again, streamlining that may help as well.
In your opinion, is law enforcement better trained than they were 5 or 10 years ago on cyber attacks, and how to prosecute and how to find out, what the value is of what was taken, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah, no, and that's an excellent question. Unfortunately, my focus is more on helping the small businesses recover relative to the issue, and that's where my expertise stops.
Sir, it pains me to say, as I'm a former special agent, so that's where I came from. Are they better than they were 5 or 10 years ago? Yes. Has it materially improved the situation? No. Per my comments earlier, in a lot of cases what happens with a small business especially is they don't register on the Richter scale enough to draw the attention of the law enforcement entities that could actually do something to resolve the situation. And so the FBI and Secret Service have a lot of very skilled people that do exceptional work, but there's only so much availability, so much bandwidth, and they are naturally going to gravitate to the larger events. And so while they would be interested to hear of the issues within the small businesses, the idea that they're going to send an agent down to start working on those cases is just not reasonable. And so what you're left with is local law enforcement, who usually are very excited to help, but they technically can't do anything. And they're very effective, and they have put a lot of people through training where if you have internal theft, you have an employee that's committing fraud or something like that, they can assist with those types of issues. But at the end of the day, the goal of law enforcement typically is to effect an arrest against somebody. And with the vast majority of the attackers overseas, it's quite often hard to get them interested. And what they seem to miss is they do play a key role in this. Take a typical small business that might not have great security monitoring themselves, so they don't produce the evidence internally for us to reconstruct what the events were. But let's say we can see an offending IP address that touched them where the attacker came from on the last hop. that IP address is in somewhere else, another business, another citizen in the US. We cannot go acquire that system. But if I work with a law enforcement entity, I could very rapidly get some type of search authority. They can go acquire that system. We might be able to recover the evidence we need to see how bad the event was off of that system. And when we try to do that now, quite often that is weeks or months to go through that process. By that time, all the evidence we could have used to limit the damage is gone. And so there is a role, but because they normally aren't going to end up in arrest, it's hard to get them engaged.
Thank you very much. Last question. Assuming the value of the compromised data is covered by insurance, how do you quantify? How do you put a number on compromised data? How does that work? That's got to be that's got to be a tough thing. Give me some insight into that, please.
So it is a tough thing, and talking about the patchwork of laws, it really depends on, it largely depends when you talk about how those records are compromised, you know, where they were compromised, the extent of them, the number of people who are going to require notification. There is a general sentiment that there's desensitization happening across the population, so fewer and fewer people are taking carriers up on offers for things like credit monitoring. It depends largely on the forensics, how long they were in your network, how much information was compromised, and really driving up those forensics costs, any fines and penalties that could be resulting from that, and if there were data restoration costs involved. So the sums are, they range wildly. To get to your earlier question, I would just want to point out that they say the prosecution rate for these kind of nefarious actors only ranges around 10%. And so that means that criminals who were sort of lurking in the dark web are currently coming out because there's no reason to be in the dark, and that means they're talking to each other. And so the sophistication and nature of the attacks really continues to increase.
The gentleman's time has expired.
I yield back the time I do not have, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. The gentleman from Florida, Mr. Lawson, is ranking member of the Subcommittee on Health and Technology. It's recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome to the committee. Ms. Davis, as you're well aware, many small businesses may be unaware of the capital, lack of capital to purchase cyber insurance. What can small business organizations, SBA as well as local entities, do to better educate the small business about the risk of cyber attacks and the importance of purchasing cyber insurance? And I say that because I was in small business, and I've been trying to wind some things down. And a young person came in. I heard Mr. Shanak talk about the birth day of this here is 10 years old, and I had a typewriter in the office, which is IBM's Selectric typewriter. And one of the young persons said, "What is that?" You know, and I said, "This is one of IBM best." They said, "They still make those." So my question is, I just want to say that because when he talked about the birthday of this, what can we do to educate small businesses about it?
So I think when it comes to small businesses, you know, we really have to think through the culture of an organization. When it comes to controls, the expectations across industry class are really going to vary wildly, so you can't say this one control will make you a better risk. There is no silver bullet answer, but it is about building a culture of resilience. It's about understanding what your risks may be. It's about ongoing employee training, and these are items that don't have a significant price tag associated with them. That's just an ongoing effort to make sure that you're bringing the right people into the conversation and that you have that multi-stakeholder incident response plan in place if and when an event occurs. Because what we do find is organizations who are lacking that sort of preparation are the ones who have a longer amount of downtime, more financial impact to their organizations because they weren't prepared. I would say from an insurance perspective, do keep in mind that although the costs will vary based on some of the subjectivities we've talked about, you know, they can't afford to be out of business for a prolonged period of time. And so when you think of the safety net that an insurance policy can bring to the equation, it will likely be a fairly small financial cost compared to that longer hardship if the downtime is significant.
Okay, and you know, I've read the staff report on cyber insurance can be customized to the specific needs of the company, Mr. Shanack, what are some of the more innovative ways that you see cyber insurance can be crafted to the specific needs of small businesses?
One of the trends we've seen lately is tailoring it to small businesses by making it even more comprehensive. So a lot of the policies that may be out there currently offer, the extent of higher limits, but you have to choose which exact coverages you feel you need as a small business owner. And the concern is, well, maybe I select the wrong coverages for what I need. So we are seeing a trend of packaging multiple coverages under a common limit, making it a very streamlined approach so that they don't have to answer 12 pages of underwriting questions where you're going to get the wrong information, not by any malicious intent, but simply by the fact that they don't understand their own business. And providing that cyber insurance as an endorsement to a policy they might already be buying. So perhaps, they're already buying a business owner policy that's providing them with property and liability insurance. Can we add on a very nice and tidy package of cyber coverages as an endorsement to that?
And a real quick question anyone can answer. Will small business in the same businesses be able to do group coverages, hopefully to stabilize their premiums?
Along the lines of almost a captive or some sort of that, there has been, I know, some conversations around that idea. It's a little bit of a challenging idea because, as we stated earlier, cyber does provide some level of aggregation exposure, and so by doing a group approach, you may be doubling down on that aggregation exposure as well. But there may be some cost savings, especially as these policies tend to bring services into play. Those services may be had at a more competitive price.
Okay, my time is expired, but I hope you all remember the IBM Select time, right? Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you very much. The gentleman yields back. We want to very much thank the panel here for helping the committee to better understand an issue that more and more small businesses all across the country are facing, and that's the cyber risk that's out there, the attacks that they could be facing. We're committed as a committee to doing everything we can to assist the small business community to better protect themselves, whether it's best practices, whether it's potentially cybersecurity insurance, and you all have assisted us in doing that, so we thank you very much for that. I would ask unanimous consent that members have 5 legislative days to submit statements and supporting materials for the record. Without objection, so ordered. And if there's no further business to come before the committee, we're adjourned. Thank you very much.